Gary is, yeah. Good evening, and welcome to the Republican candidate mayoral debate for the City of Scranton. I'm Jean Harris, a member of the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County, a board member for the League, and chairperson of the Political Science Department here at the University of Scranton. First, let me ask everybody to please turn off any devices so we don't have to be interrupted. So welcome again. I want to thank the partners involved in this debate, so the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County, the Political Science Department at the University of Scranton, and ECTV, who is taping this, and it will be shown. You can see it both on ECTV, Comcast 19, as well as the League of Women Voters website. We also have done several other events, and we have one more event tomorrow night. So we've done an event this season on the ballot measure for Lackawanna County. We've had city council debates, debate for the Register of Wills, and tomorrow night we'll have a debate with the Democratic candidates running for the mayor for the City of Scranton. No person, candidate, or political group, this is our media statement, no person, candidate, or political group is allowed to use or edit any media from a League of Women Voters event for campaign purposes. Any use of the media requires the express written approval of the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County. The audio or video must be broadcast in its entirety, except by legitimate media reporting on events. The details for the forum, we expect this to be approximately an hour long, maybe a little bit less. All candidates will be answering the same questions, and no questions were given to either candidate before the event. There will be no opening statements from the candidates. All questions do have specific response times, and so we will be timing the answers. Each candidate will be allowed up to 2 one-minute rebuttals at their request during the debate. Candidates also will be providing a 2-minute closing statement. At that point, we would hope that you can hold your applause until the end of each candidate's closing statement. The rationale for the questions. The League of Women Voters believes that democratic government depends upon the informed and active participation of its citizens. This requires that governmental bodies protect the citizens' right to know by giving adequate notice of proposed actions, holding open meetings, and making public records accessible. In addition, we believe that responsible government should be responsive to the will of the people. It requires integrity and accountability. Just for the voters out there, we are trying to make sure that we get specific information from each candidate. So we ask you to please listen carefully to the candidates' responses. We encourage you to ask yourself, is the candidate answering the questions with specifics and enough specific that you can use that to measure his success if elected? Are the candidate's proposals realistic? Can he actually carry out his plan if elected? With that being said, I'm pleased to introduce our 2 candidates running in the Republican primary for the position of mayor of the City of Scranton. First, Mr. Garrett, or Gary Lewis, is a graduate from Scranton Prep. He earned a bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Scranton. He has worked as a consultant for Deloitte. Currently, he is the owner of ISA Analytics in Scranton, which is a consulting agency specializing in distressed debt. Our second candidate, Mr. Marcel Lisi, is a graduate of West Scranton High School. He earned a bachelor's degree in history, political science, and pre-law from Marywood University. He has served as an intern for U.S. Senator Bob Casey, U.S. Senator Arlen Specter, and U.S. Representative Paul Jaworski. He was a substitute teacher in the Scranton School District. Currently, he is an entrepreneur. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Before we get started with the questions, I will read the job description for the position of mayor that is in the Home Rule Charter. The mayor and council jointly shall be the governing body of Scranton city government. The powers of the city government shall be divided among the executive and legislative branches of the city government. Power belonging to one branch of the government shall not be exercised by the other branch, except as expressly provided in this charter. All powers and duties of the city government which are legislative in nature shall be exercised and performed by the council. All powers and duties which are executive in nature shall be exercised or performed by the mayor or such other executive officer of the city government as the mayor may designate, except as otherwise specifically provided herein. In the event the nature of any power or duty is uncertain, or the law creating such power or duty requires cooperation between the branches of the city government, the president of council and the mayor shall fix the responsibility for the exercise of such power or the performance of such duty. So that's according to the Home Rule Charter of the City of Scranton. So now we'll begin. We drew lots, and Mr. Lewis will be the first to answer the first question. And this is a 1-minute response time. The gritty reality of being hired by the voters to serve as the mayor for the City of Scranton is that it will be a really difficult job. Why do you want this job? Later on, we'll ask what qualifications you have. So here we really just want to know why you want to be the mayor of the City of Scranton. Mr. Lewis.
For the last year, I've spent the majority of my time researching, documenting, and writing about municipal distress, using Scranton as a case study. During that time, I've successfully had my opinions published by organizations like Bond Buyer, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. The reason I'm running for mayor is because I do see a very fixable problem that exists all over the country, and I don't see anyone willing to take the necessary and politically unpalatable steps to fix the underlying issues. I think that not having a career in politics in mind frees me up to make those decisions, and my background really does qualify me to do that as well.
Thank you. Mr. Lisi?
Well, Mr. Lewis just gave you an answer that's not an answer. Here's why I'm running for mayor. My hometown is suffering. I was born and raised here. I'm a graduate of West Scranton High School, Marywood University. Most of my family left the area. They moved away. The taxes are too high, and there's no place to work. Now, everything in the city of Scranton is connected to the high tax rate. People literally build around the city of Scranton. Honestly, we don't even have a Walmart in Scranton. That's pathetic. There's one in Dixon City. There's one in Taylor. How come there's not one in Scranton? Aren't we the largest city in northeast Pennsylvania? That's ridiculous. So what I'm trying to do is lower the tax rates. As our tax rates go down, the revenue for the city will actually go up because more people and more businesses want to locate in the city, and that's going to expand the tax base. So you're going to have more entities paying into the system. But that's why I'm running for mayor. I'm trying to save my city. I'm trying to help my family, help my neighborhood, help my community. If I'm elected mayor, I'm going to fight every second of every day. This isn't about me. This is about my community.
Thank you. The second question, and Mr. Lisi will begin with this one. And this is a 1-minute response as well. Wanting the job and having the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do it well are two different things. What experience, skills, and abilities can you bring to the job that will make you a successful mayor?
Well, first off, I can relate with every citizen in Scranton because I've had every job under the sun. I've been a laborer, I've been a substitute teacher, I've did a stint in landscaping, right now I'm an entrepreneur. I'm actually looking into construction and board games, believe it or not. But I'm doing whatever I have to do to survive. And I've also had a background in the federal government. I was an intern for Senators Casey and Specter and Congressman Kanjorski. And I've spoke with hundreds of people all throughout northeastern Pennsylvania, constituents of these people who I worked for. And so I think that best qualifies me because I actually have a hand on what the problems are in the city. I actually go out there, I knock on doors, I talk to people. They tell me, Marcel, we can't afford to pay our property taxes. Marcel, my kids, they don't have any place to work. They're ready to leave the city. Most of my family left the city. This is what people are telling me, and this is what I'm fighting for. This is why I'm running for mayor. It's not about me, it's about them. And honestly, if there's another candidate out there, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, that said, hey, I'm going to lower taxes and bring more jobs back to Scranton, hell, I'd drop out in a heartbeat. But guess what? There are no other candidates, so that's why I'm running, and that's what qualifies me.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, same question to you. What experience, skills, and abilities can you bring to the job that will make you a successful mayor?
This is a very good place for me to talk about my background. I graduated from the University of Scranton with a degree in accounting. I went to work for Deloitte, and I spent 5 years working in Deloitte's securitization practice. The bulk of that time was spent working with failed banks, doing complex accounting under two very difficult, up until 2007, very obscure accounting concepts that generally referred to as mark-to-market. I understand how cash flows work. I understand how budgets work. I understand how numbers work. Over the last year, I've continued to grow my skill set, and I think that my background and the publishings that I've gotten out there with the major news organizations really do speak to my deep understanding of how a city functions and how a budget needs to work. That's why I should be mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. The third question also has a minute response time, and this will start with Mr. Lewis. What do you need to accomplish in 4 years that will allow you to call yourself a successful mayor?
We need to balance the budget. It's great to sit here and talk about how people are leaving and how taxes drive people out of the city, but the most fundamental issue that Scranton has is an imbalanced budget, which is causing the tax hikes. It's causing us to be unable to provide the most basic municipal services, things like on-time garbage collection, proper snow removal, road maintenance. These are things that we cannot afford. If you look at the paving projects the city's undertaken, they've all been done with federal grant money in neighborhoods that were targeted because of their income profile. The city itself does not have the ability to undertake massive capital projects. I believe that if you are able to balance the budget, restore the city's credit rating, and leave the city in a position to tackle the large public works projects that need to be done, I would consider that a success.
Thank you. The same question to you, Mr. Lisi. What do you need to accomplish in 4 years that will allow you to call yourself a successful mayor?
Well, unlike Mr. Lewis, it's implied that we have to balance the budget. I'm trying to stop people from leaving the city because as taxes go up, more businesses and more families leave. Thus, you have less revenue to work with and operate within your budget. You have less money. If we lower taxes, more people, more businesses will come back. You will raise more revenue for the city. That's how you get more money for the city projects. That's how you raise more revenue. That's how you balance your budget. I'm totally against spending. Absolutely. I don't think we should. Right now, we're probably borrowing money just to cut the grass at Naog Park. That's not right. So I'm trying to lower taxes and keep people here. I don't know what Mr. Lewis is trying to do, but most of my family left. Maybe it's not personal for him. It's personal for me. I'm trying to restore people back to Scranton. I'm trying to stop homes from being turned into apartments because a single working family can't afford to pay the property taxes on their home. And so it's turned into apartments. And that's where you get blight. That's where you get crime. I need more people in the city, not less.
Thank you. The mayor and city council are elected to work in the best interest of the city and its residents. As mayor, how will you develop a working relationship with city council that enables the city to move forward? This is a 1-minute response, and we're going to start with Mr. Lisi. So how will you develop a working relationship with city council that enables the city to move forward?
Well, unlike Mr. Chris Doherty, I'm actually going to go to a council meeting. I'm actually going to look at constituents in the face, the citizens of Scranton, if I'm elected mayor, and I'm going to see what their problems are. I'm going to be there. If they have a problem, I want them to approach me after they're done talking to council. I want their telephone number. I want their address. I want to be a hands-on mayor. I want to show up on their property. I want to know where the problem is. I want to see it from my eyes only. That's how you get things done. That's how you work with council. It's simple as that. You got to look the constituents in the face together. And you got to work with council. You got to show up to meetings. You got to see what's on their agenda. You got to pay attention. You can't just kick back in your office or just avoid the meeting altogether. You got to show that you want to participate in local government, that you can be there, that that's why the people elected you. And that's how you get along with council.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
I think a good way to begin fostering a relationship with city council is to attend the meetings. I think it's also important to do a lot with council behind closed doors and off of ECTV. I would love to treat city council as a board of directors. We have various committees on city council like the finance committee. There's no reason that they shouldn't be kept up to speed in the budgeting process and brought in as we have various questions to get a feel for how they think the city is reacting. I think city council serves a very important form of check and balance within city government. And I do think that a little bit of, not aggression would be an inappropriate word, but some healthy infighting fosters the sort of back and forth that you need to come up with ideas to fix a very big problem.
Thank you. We're going to move on to talking about the city's financial status more specifically. And so this is a question with a 1-minute response time. Is declaring bankruptcy a viable option to the city's financial recovery? Please justify your answer. And we're going to start with Mr. Lewis.
I believe the bankruptcy would be the most appropriate fix for the city's financial problems. Unfortunately, it is not the political reality for the city of Scranton. A bankruptcy filing, which needs to be initiated by the city's executive or mayor, would also need to be approved by city council and then sanctioned by DCED. There's no way that's going to happen. So I don't think bankruptcy is an option that's on the table. It does appear that the state is working on a number of fixes that would be available to the city in bankruptcy. Things like our pension reform, and potentially we could look to the state for some assistance with debt restructuring. Those are the two most critical items that I think need to be addressed, and the reasons that I have pushed for bankruptcy is because they do offer a method of addressing them. But bankruptcy is certainly not a political reality within Pennsylvania at the moment.
Thank you. Mr. Lisi, the same question. Is declaring bankruptcy a viable option to the city's financial recovery? Please justify your answer.
Bankruptcy is absolutely not an option for this city. Now, Mr. Lewis, you say you're a smart guy, but if you know that bankruptcy is not a viable option, how come you were advocating for it? That doesn't make any sense. If we declare bankruptcy, who's going to want to live here? Who wants to live in a bankrupt city? How are we going to attract new citizens to Scranton? How are we going to keep our children here? Do they want to pay more taxes to live in a bankrupt city? I know I don't. I'll get the first ticket out of the city we declare bankruptcy. I don't want to invest my future here. But we can't declare bankruptcy because all of a sudden you'll get the creditors coming in, the court's taking away our freedom, telling us what our tax rates are going to be. We need to balance the budget. Everybody understands that, but we need to lower taxes doing it. We need to expand our tax base. We need more jobs. We need more people in the city paying into the system. That's how you get past the bankruptcy dilemma there. You can't declare bankruptcy. It's going to give Scranton a bad name in the long run. And right now we have a bad name, and that's going to make it worse. We need to make Scranton a place where people can say, oh, Scranton, Pennsylvania, that's a great place to live. I'm going to move there. I'm going to build my business there. I'm going to start a family there.
Thank you. We're going to continue with talking about the status of the financial status of the city. There are two levels to Scranton's financial distress. One is a pattern of spending more money than it collects in revenue each fiscal year, which is a structural deficit, and the other is the obligation to pay back a large and growing debt. Clearly, the city of Scranton has to eliminate its persistent pattern of structural deficits. We will first discuss the revenue side of the budget, and then we'll turn to the spending side. What specific changes are you willing to fight for in your first year as mayor to move toward eliminating Scranton's structural deficit? I will mention a revenue source and ask each of you what change you are willing to fight for in terms of that revenue source. Please give one of the following 6-word answers. So at this point, we just want one sentence answer. Either I will fight for an increase, I will fight for a decrease, or I will fight for no change. And we'll start the list with Mr. Lisi. So the first revenue source is real estate tax.
I will fight for a decrease.
Mr. Lewis?
I will fight for no change.
Thank you. The next is the wage tax. Mr. Lisi?
I will fight for a decrease.
Mr. Lewis?
I will fight for no change.
The next is the mercantile business privilege tax. Mr. Lisi?
I will fight for a decrease.
I will also fight for a decrease.
Thank you. Real estate transfer tax. Mr. Lisi?
I will fight for a decrease.
Mr. Lewis?
I will fight for a decrease.
And the fifth revenue source is the garbage fee. Mr. Lisi?
I'll fight for a decrease.
Mr. Lewis?
I will fight for no change.
Okay, so having gone through that list, now we have a question where we're going to allow you 2 minutes to respond. Please discuss the revenue sources that we have just mentioned and why you will take the actions you stated. And we'll start this with Mr. Lewis. So the answers you just gave, we want to know why you will take those actions.
It's no secret that Scranton has an environment that is openly hostile to businesses. Look at the way we've treated the food trucks. Look at our mercantile tax, our business privilege tax, our realty transfer tax. These are the types of nuisance taxes that altogether generate a relatively tiny amount of the city's overall revenue. And they are the nuisance taxes which cities attempt to avoid by moving into Dunmore or Dixon City or Troop. So I think it's very, very important that we simplify and make it much easier to do business within the city. And to me, the quickest, easiest way to do so is to eliminate the nuisance taxes. I do believe that the city's real estate taxes are too high, but as the real estate taxes make up the single largest, well, the second largest component within the city's overall revenue stream, I think it would be extremely, extremely detrimental to go cutting at something that we're already collecting at about 85, 89%. If you can stabilize the city, and if you can manage the city's expenses, that leaves you open to offer tax decreases down the road. Furthermore, I think by fostering business within the city, by eliminating the nuisance taxes and encouraging hiring within the city limits, we'll also be able to effectively increase the local wages. And to me, an increase in your actual wages year over year of 3 or 4%, anything that outpaces inflation, gives you more actual money, more real dollars to spend. That's tantamount to a tax cut in an environment that doesn't offer any sort of wage growth, which is what we've had for the last decade. So that is why I'm focusing on nuisance taxes first and opening up the door to economic development, which will leave you, the taxpayer, with more money in your pocket.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lisi, the same question. Please discuss the revenue sources that were mentioned earlier and why you will take the actions you stated you will take.
I will fight to lower every tax I possibly can within the city's power because they are so high right now. If we keep them the way they are, just static like Mr. Lewis wants to, more people will leave the city and you will lose that revenue. Nissan downtown, Steamtown, moving to Dunmore. Perotti Cigar, Main Street, moving to Dunmore. LT Verastro Distributing Company, just moved to Old Forge. Mr. Lewis, wake up. The population's decreasing. Businesses and people are leaving the city. Where's your revenue coming from, buddy? You going to pay it? I know I'm not.
Can I rebut to that?
Yes, so you have a 1-minute rebuttal to start with, Mr. Lewis.
If you actually looked at the city's budget, you would understand that for the last 4 years, the city has had nearly identical amounts of borrowing base, which is essentially the amount of cash in the door. We do not have a draining tax base.
Yes, we do.
Mr. Lisi, please let him answer the question.
I'm sorry, I'm passionate.
You'll get your time when he's done.
What we have in Scranton is a population flight that's driven by decreasing home values, a lack of jobs, and those are two fundamental issues which are caused by a structurally imbalanced budget. I think that, if you really look at what the city has, we don't have a decreasing amount of revenue. We don't have to be concerned with our revenue going down in future years because we hold tax rates constant. The most critical thing we need to do is prevent additional tax hikes.
Can I rebut?
Thank you. Sure, you have a minute as well.
Mr. Lewis, if you have an automobile, just drive around the city and look at all the homes and businesses for sale. It speaks for itself. You're losing revenue. You're losing your tax base. Keep the taxes where they are because in 10 years, you're going to lose people. And you know what? I probably won't be here either.
We'll move forward then to the spending side of the budget. Obviously, somewhere the budget needs to give. So this question will also have 2-minute response time. Most of the city's operating budget, about 79%, is spent on providing services. In addition to increasing revenue, spending cuts must also be considered to eliminate deficit spending. In this year's operating budget, police and fire account for 64%, with 99% of those dollars paying for salary and benefits. 16% is spent on the Department of Public Works, of which 2/3 is for salary and benefits. What service areas should or could be cut, and what would you do to gain support so those cuts could be implemented? If not cuts in any of these areas, then where? And we'll start this I'm sorry, we'll start this with Mr. Lisi.
We need union concessions. The unions are asking too much of Scranton taxpayers. They are driving Scranton taxpayers out of the city. We need union concessions, period. And if I'm elected mayor, I'm also going to be a hands-on mayor. I'm going to be a supervisor. I'm going to go to DPW. I'm going to go to the police. I'm going to go to the fire departments. I'm going to work in the administration building. I want to know that every dollar that a taxpayer pays is being spent properly. I want to know who's taking a 6-hour lunch and a 2-hour breakfast. I want to know what kind of materials we're paving the streets with. That's the kind of mayor I want to be.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
I think it's important to note that while the vast majority of our expenditures go out of the city coffers in the form of salary and benefits, it's not because there's rampant abuse occurring by city employees. There's been a decade of infighting and a decade of court battles that have led to the unsustainable CBA agreements that we have now. I do think that when you look overall at how the city's budget breaks out, we're spending about $26 million on salary overall, about $13 million on healthcare overall, about 10 to 11 million on debt service overall. When you add those numbers up, you come up with more than $55 million. Scranton only has $55 million coming in the door. So that means that we cannot afford to turn the lights on. We cannot afford to put tires on the fire trucks. We cannot afford to maintain our streets. I think that we do need to find concessions somewhere. But overall, we're dealing with a structural deficit of in the neighborhood of $7 to $10 million. I think by making Scranton more business friendly and growing our overall tax revenue, we can also couple that with some cuts towards our the salary bucket, the pension benefits, and the health care, and get Scranton to a sustainable place without putting our public employees under the bus. It's entirely possible with the 20% salary cut that all of our police and firemen are still making close to twice the median salary in the area. To me, that's a sign that we have something a little askew. So I would focus my initial efforts on saying thank you to the unions, letting them know that I don't think they're holding us hostage, but that they do need to work with us to free up some money so that we can get Scranton back on the right track and growing.
Can I rebut?
This is your last of the two rebuttals.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Lewis gave you a long, complicated answer, but in the short run, it's called union concessions. That's what I'm advocating for. Thank you.
Thank you. Several candidates for City Council believe that City Council has a role to play in contract negotiations. What do you believe is City Council's role in negotiating contracts with city employee unions and in monitoring contract implementation in relation to the mayor's role? And we'll start with Mr. Lewis on this question with a 1-minute response time.
I believe that City Council could play a very critical role in any contract negotiations. If you look at who's currently on City Council, we have Jack Loscombe, who is himself a retired city employee. He understands what our city employees are going through. He knows what it is like to be there day to day and all the headaches that they put up with and perhaps the broken bureaucracy that we have. I would like to delegate the first round of contract negotiations to someone who has been on both sides of the table, someone that understands both the fiscal constraints and the HR and employee relations perspective of a contract negotiation. After a first round contract is created, I would look and see how does this overall fit into the city's larger 5 or 10-year budget plan and review it for fiscal sensibility. That's how I would approach contract negotiation.
Thank you. Mr. Lisi, the same question. Several candidates for City Council believe that City Council has a role to play in contract negotiations. What do you believe is Council's role in negotiating contracts with city employee unions and monitoring the contract implementation in relation to the mayor's role?
The mayor should take charge. That's what we elect him for. The council should advise, simple as that. But when it comes to union contracts, I would devise it through an operating budget. I would not spend more than what the city takes in. and I would refuse otherwise. I would not sign a contract if they're asking too much, and I have to make the citizens of Scranton, the taxpayers, borrow more money just to pay them. The median income in the city of Scranton is less than 20 grand a year for the average citizen. For a cop and fireman, I'm sure it's probably more than 50. So how do you justify that? You don't. So I would construct a contract with the unions, police, fire, whoever else, within the operating budget. Simple as that. I'm not borrowing money to pay those people.
Thank you. This is a question with a 1-minute response time. Pennsylvania state government can take actions, including passing legislation, that can make governing a financially distressed city easier or more difficult. What state government action do you think is essential to moving Scranton forward, and how do you get the state to take that action? And we'll start with Mr. Lisi.
Well, when it comes to the state of affairs in Scranton in relationship to the state, I think the state of Pennsylvania is useless. They do nothing for the city. We've been in distress status for most of my life. Obviously, the state's actions aren't helping. We need to start at a local level. We need to cut the state out completely because they're assisting in killing growth. We need to lower taxes, but it needs to start at a grassroots level. It needs to start right here, right now at this debate. This is what we're here for. This is what we're talking about. We need to lower taxes. We need to give taxpayers a break. We need to keep those people who pay taxes still in the city. We can't let them go. But they're going to leave if we don't lower the taxes. So that's what I think of the state's relationship to the city. And I don't think the state can help us. We need to help ourselves. Scranton needs to help itself.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Can you repeat the
Yes, I can. Pennsylvania state government can take actions, including passing legislation, that can make governing a financially distressed city easier or more difficult. What state government action do you think is essential to move Scranton forward, and how do you get the state to take that action?
The most essential thing that the state can do for us right now is to grant some sort of pension reform, which is already underway in Harrisburg. I think the second most important thing that the state can do for us is to give us a mechanism to restructure our outstanding debt. That doesn't necessarily mean force haircuts on bondholders, but we do need to revise the Unit Debt Act, which hasn't been touched since the late 70s, to give us more ability to refinance our long-term debt into more affordable payments. So those are the first two things that I would like to see the state do, is grant us some way to reform our pensions and some way to restructure our long-term debt. As to how do you lobby for this, these individuals, our local state representatives, they should be there fighting for us as it is. It reflects very poorly on everyone when you have a city like Scranton that can't afford to make payroll. So I think the issue really is sort of self-lobbying, but you do need to walk in with a solution and say, look, this works if you pass this piece of legislation.
Thank you. Staying with this sense of intergovernmental relations, how important is reassessment of property values to moving Scranton forward? And if it is important, then what actions can you take as mayor to influence Lackawanna County government to complete property reassessment? And this is a 1-minute response time, and we'll start with Mr. Lewis.
Reassessment is a very hot-button issue, and I think in Scranton, a reassessment would be very detrimental for the majority of our property owners. Scranton has sort of worked around the fact that we haven't reassessed our properties by increasing our millage rates. So if you were to see your property assessment go up tenfold from $8,000 to $80,000, that would be a commensurate increase in your real estate tax bill. I don't think anyone's ever looked at both sides of the equation and said, okay, once we get a reassessment done, what do our tax rates need to look like? What I would rather do is I would like to see the city move away from real estate taxes as a primary income driver for city government. And I do think the state's looking at solutions like that. They are exploring an additional sales tax, and just to sum it up, I wouldn't push the topic of reassessment. I think it would be more detrimental than good at the moment.
Thank you. Mr. Lisi, the same question. How important is reassessment of property values to moving Scranton forward? And if it is important, then what actions can you take as mayor to influence Lackawanna County to complete property reassessment?
Property reassessment in the city of Scranton is not important at this time. However, later on, it will be. Right now, we need more jobs in the city. We need more factories. Families need to work. They can't pay their property taxes. If we throw a reassessment on them right now, they're going to lose their homes, plain and simple. However, if we start bringing better business into the city, more people, more taxpayers, more revenue, in the long run, we can have a property assessment because people will have stable incomes. They will have higher incomes. They will be able to afford the shift from the old, outdated reassessment to the new reassessment. So in the immediate future, no property reassessments at all. In the long run, if I'm even around, yes, property reassessments only if we start getting Scranton families back to work. And I will lobby for that as mayor if I'm elected.
Thank you. This is a question, we'll start with Mr. Lisi, and it's a 1-minute response time. Should Scranton develop collaborative planning and working relationships with other municipal governments in the region? And if yes, how do you as mayor develop and maintain collaborative working relationships with other municipal governments in the region?
Well, we'll take an example for Dunmore, for instance. We share the Scranton Sewer Authority. Sometimes we share our fire departments. And that's good. That's a good relationship. However, we need to check out what the balance is. If we're using too many of another a borough or municipality's resources, or if they're using too many of ours, we need to balance that. It needs to be a 50-50 relationship because I'm not going to ask my neighbors, my friends, my family members, people in the community to pay more money for taxpayers who don't live in the city of Scranton. So we need to do that.
Mr. Lewis?
Cooperative agreements among municipalities is a great way to reduce your costs. And there are a number of back office, for lack of a better term, governmental functions that we could seriously see some major cost savings from. Things like your IT infrastructure, anything related to your accounts payable and your accounts receivable, anything that goes into running an office. Those are some of the larger expenses that smaller municipalities have. So they would see an immediate cost savings, as would Scranton, if we were to come up with some sort of arrangement in which we build them for rendering a service that we are already good at. This is an initiative that's actually underway in the state of Michigan. They have the Virtual City program in which Lansing and a number of other municipalities are pooling their resources to come up with shared services and shared back office applications, and they're seeing significant savings of $2 to $5 million in cities about the size of Scranton. So I do think that sort of shared service is critical to restructuring.
Thank you. If I can backtrack and start a second part of this question for Mr. Lisi to start with. How do you go about developing and maintaining the collaboration? You both suggest we need some collaboration and working relationships. How do you start that process as mayor of the city of Scranton?
For instance, if Dunmore's having a council meeting, show up, talk to the council members. Try to talk to the mayor of Dunmore. Try to talk to the citizens of Dunmore at the council meeting. Try to pick everybody's brain. Simple as that. Show up, participate, be there.
Mr. Lewis?
Talking's wonderful, but you need to have a plan. My first step would be to do a proper analysis of the city's strengths and weaknesses, and that way I could truly understand what it is that we're doing right in City Hall, because we are doing some things right. Once we know what it is that we can capitalize on, we can then formalize that, go out to our neighboring communities and say, look, you have 5 people that are tackling a job that we know how to do with 1 person. We'd be happy to hire another staff and take this on for a percentage of the revenue we bring in or a percentage of the expenses that you save. So I think the first thing we need to do is identify what a good shared service would be, identify what it costs the city, and then make that value proposition to our surrounding neighbors.
Thank you. Is it time for Home Rule Charter Study Commission to again review the structure and procedures in Scranton's Home Rule Charter? Why or why not? This is, again, a 1-minute response time, and we will start with Mr. Lewis on this one.
No, I don't think Scranton needs to review its current form of government. I do think that the strong mayor form of government that we have under the city's current home rule charter is one of the few things that has allowed us to bridge the crisis of the last few years. If we had a more decentralized power structure, I think you would have seen even more gridlock and even more problems. So I do think that our current form of government, in which you have checks and balances provided by the legislative branch, especially if they're leveraged as a sort of board of directors, and a strong mayor that's in there actually doing the day-to-day management, is really the appropriate form of government for a city of this size.
Thank you. Mr. Lisi?
Well, as somebody who lived in the city most of my life, the city's been in distress status for over 20 years. For lack of a better word, the city government in Scranton sucks. Let's get a commission to study it. I'm all for that. If the commission finds out that the mayor's strong form of government in Scranton, the current form of government that we have, if it's working, if they determine that it's working well, keep it. If not, scrap it, get a new one. But right now, the government's not doing very well here. It's bad. It's really bad, and it's going to get worse. So get a commission. I'm all for it.
Thank you.
Can I rebut to that?
Yes, this is your final rebuttal, and it's for a minute. Thanks.
A study of Scranton's government would be very expensive, and we don't have money to throw away right now. Furthermore, if you look around the country at cities that are doing well, you can look at New York City, for example. There's a strong mayor form of government and a very solvent municipal body. You can look at Evansville, Indiana, another strong mayor form of government, a city that has recovered from their distress. When you're dealing with cities of less than 100,000 people, having a lot of power consolidated in a single office and spread out amongst appointed managers is really the most effective way to go about it. It's not Scranton's government that is broken. It's Scranton's budget that is broken. The budget got broken by virtue of all the infighting and all of the reckless spending that occurred. You're going to have that sort of financial malfeasance in any form of government. And the quickest way to fix that, I believe, is to maintain a strong mayor form of government.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question about the colleges in this area and have a 1-minute response time. And we'll start with Mr. Lisi on this. Scranton has 5 college campuses located either totally or partially within our borders, and 2 more located in the county. What can Scranton do to sell the city to students and their families for both the short term and post-graduation? And so this is a 1-minute response time, and we'll start with Mr. Lisi.
We got all these colleges, all these universities. We just got the new medical school, and the mayor and the council said, oh, it's going to bring jobs and industry. No, it's not. I'm sure 100% of those students that graduated this year, they're not going to live in the city. They're going to move if they have half a brain. We need to lower taxes. We need jobs for graduates in Scranton. We need businesses for them, but businesses need low taxes, and property owners need low taxes. That's how you keep the graduates here and their families. That's how you have graduates start families. They need to afford to live in Scranton to begin with. Right now, if you go stand up on a really high hill in Scranton, we got plenty of them, and you look around the valley and you ask yourself, gee, how come all these new home developments and all these new businesses are being built around the city of Scranton, not in it? It's because the taxes are too high. I'm going to keep saying it, and I'm not going to stop. The taxes are just too damn high.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, the same question.
Our institutions of higher education are a fantastic economic driver for the city. I have friends that I've met since they've moved here because they came for the medical college. People that came from California and Oregon to Scranton to study because they truly do believe that the schools around here are doing something. Scranton offers a tremendous value proposition in terms of cost of living and cost of homes. Homes in Scranton are about half the price that they are in other areas of Lackawanna County. So I think the first thing we need to do is we need to give students a reason to stay post-graduation, and we're working on that. The downtown is, I think, a critical factor in maintaining students, getting them to love the city and getting them to say, I want to be here even though we have problems. Once you have the people in, they will build the community that they want. This is what went on in West Philadelphia. This is why you can now walk from 30th Street Station up to Penn and not have problems. I mean, this is how you gentrify an area, and colleges are central to that.
Thank you. We'll do another 1-minute response time, starting with Mr. Lewis this time. Are the city's economic development programs providing long-term value to the taxpayers of the city?
It's a little tough because you can't truly spot what the city's economic development programs are. There's a lot of Main Street programs, there's a lot of buildings that get new facades, but it's tough to actually see where are they investing the money. I haven't seen a business move into the downtown and get a community development block grant loan and invest millions of dollars downtown in a while. There have been a lot of city council, legislation for a $100,000 loan here or larger loans along the way, but there hasn't been any substantial investment. I think that a great way to overhaul the city's economic development is to work more closely with the chamber and convince businesses why they need to be here. Convince them that people are coming back to Scranton. And people are coming back to Scranton. I came back to Scranton. I moved away and I came home. So people do want to be here.
Thank you. Mr. Lisi?
Hey, Gary, why don't you find the people that want to be here and bring them into the audience tonight, because I can't find one in Scranton, and I've been to hundreds, if not thousands, of doors in this city.
That's your answer to the question.
That's
Okay.
my answer.
Moving away from finances, so we will not want answers dealing with finances. What do you see as a top priority issue for the city of Scranton, and how do you as mayor get it addressed? So other than finances, what do you see as a top priority issue for the city of Scranton, and how do you as mayor get it addressed? And we'll start with Mr. Lisi. And this is a 1-minute response time.
Top priority for Scranton: lower taxes, bring more jobs back, bring more people back, expand the tax base, give the city more revenue. Anything else is useless, worthless. It's not going to help the citizens. People will continue to leave. That's it.
I'll repeat the question. Other than finances, what do you see as a top priority issue for the city of Scranton, and how do you as mayor get it addressed? Mr. Lewis.
I think a top priority for the city of Scranton needs to be maintenance of our public infrastructure. Our roads are not in good shape. You can wander through a lot of the neighborhoods and there's not really curbs anymore. The roads have been paved so many times, it's destroying people's yards. So I do think that a major initiative needs to be the beautification of the city. And central to that, I think, is maintenance and major paving projects along with curbs and sidewalks. Unfortunately, we can't undertake any major initiatives if the city is on the verge of bankruptcy. So I do think that we first need to tackle the city's financial problems before we can move on to some of the more substantive community-related initiatives.
Thank you. At this point, we've come to the end of our questions, so we'll move to the closing statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for his closing statement, and we'll start the closing statements with Mr. Lewis. Lisi?
I have the first question, so we get
I'm sorry, you're right. We flipped the coin. I'm sorry. Mr. Lisi, you get the first closing statement.
As I said before, I'm a lifelong resident of the city. I feel like I'm being pushed out of my hometown. No, wait, I'm being taxed out of my own hometown. Most of my family left the area because of the high taxes and no jobs. And where they reside currently, they're better off. They're out of the county, they're out of the state. They're happy. Anybody in the city, can anybody honestly in the city of Scranton say that? Probably not, unless they're lying. But what we need to do is lower taxes. As our taxes go down, more people, more businesses, and more jobs will locate to the city. Therefore, you will have more people, more businesses paying revenue to the city, so the city's revenue will go up. When the city's revenue goes up, you could pay off debt. You could fix the streets. You could do anything you want. You got the money, basically. But if I'm elected, I'm going to fight every second of every day to make sure we lower taxes and bring jobs back. I will not concede to anything other than that. And if you want to listen to the bankruptcy guy here and say, oh, let's keep the taxes where they are. Let's have the city declare bankruptcy, but oh, wait, we can't do that. So what's my plan again? Oh, let me make up a new campaign platform. That's not going to help us. We got to lower taxes. Otherwise, people in my generation, your generation, people of any age, any ethnicity, religion in the city are going to leave, and it's going to be a ghost town, and we're seeing that right now. There's probably at least one house per block for sale. Just drive through the city. It's getting worse, not better. Come on.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
There's a big wall of letters when you go downstairs in this building, and it says, "Of those to whom much is given, much is expected." I feel very fortunate that I was raised and educated in Scranton. I had access to a great number of things that I probably wouldn't have had if I grew up somewhere else. And I think I have been very fortunate to amass the experience that I have dealing with cash flows and complex accounting. And the reason I'm running for mayor is because I do see a major, major financial hurdle to the city's continued renaissance, and that is the city's broken budget. I want to make all of my skills and all of my network available to the city so that we can properly address the city's budget issues and leave the city in a much stronger, much more solvent position so that we can have another 10 years of wonderful growth. The face of Scranton has substantially changed since I started driving through the downtown to get to prep. It is not the same city it was in the early 2000s, but we cannot continue that sort of renaissance if we cannot afford it. That is why I want to be here, and I want to be in City Hall. I want to fix the problem and then give it back to the city. Let us go back to building parks and paving roads and engaging in community development, but we need to balance the budget first. That's why I'm involved in this race.
Thank you very much. Let's give our candidates a round of applause. I'd like to thank the candidates, Mr. Lewis and Mr. Lisi, for joining us this evening. I'd like to thank the University of Scranton and the Political Science Department specifically for collaborating with the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County on this event. The League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County is an all-volunteer, nonpartisan organization whose objective is to educate voters with events like this debate tonight. We accept men and women in the League of Women Voters. The history is back to women's suffrage, but right now it is a league and a volunteer organization for both men and women, and we can always use additional people to help us to educate the electorate so that voters are able to make good choices on Election Day. So please join us in our very important work. A quote that Andrea Mulrine, the president of the League, would always likes to end the debates with is from Margaret Mead. "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Thank you. Don't forget to vote on primary election day, Tuesday, May 21st. Good evening.